Hi, everyone, and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. I am really pleased today with my guest. He's somebody I've had a couple of times on before, and I know that most of you, almost everybody says that he brings huge amounts of value to this stream and also to his own channel. I'm sure you know him already. Guys, please welcome LML. LML, do you want to say hi?
Yes, I do. I will say hi. I will say hi to all my horny goat friends in the chat. Today I am cosplaying future Rickard Stark, the horny wolf. This is my horny wolf cosplay. I have my my Sanrixian wolf tee, and I've got my Stephiz Bloodstone wolf head brooch here. And I am more than happy and privileged to be here to talk about Rickard and Brandon Stark. Yes, Rickard and Brandon Stark, not horny guts, but I do want to say hi. Not only is it a privilege, Robert, to be on your channel, but it's a privilege to be with all of your amazing fans. You have some of the very best fans, and horny goat jokes aside, you really do have great fans. I watched your Q&A earlier this week, and the quality of questions that you get is very high, and it speaks well of your fandom. It's not a surprise. Your fare is very, I wouldn't say intellectual in like a hoity-toity way, but it's very cerebral. It's well thought out, well reasoned, and so yeah, it's a privilege to be on your channel, hanging with all your great folks. And let me see those horny goat emojis, guys.
Well, thank you. I would actually just completely echo that. I do have the most intelligent and the most beautiful viewers and subscribers anywhere, I would say. So thank you, guys. And the questions that we generally get are really, really good. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that. I just want to say a quick hi to Azora Hype. I spotted there in the chat. Good to see you. And guys, if you've not yet checked out LML's channel, Lucifer means Lightbringer. He comes at things from a different angle from most of the people on YouTube that you've probably seen videos from before, who get into the detail of things. He looks very much at the high level, the symbolism, the mythical astronomy of what's going on, all the different layers that George R.R. Martin has added into A Song of Ice and Fire. And I've certainly learned a lot by going to watch his videos. He's also got a podcast, so I would highly recommend you go and check him out. But guys, I want to get right into the topic today, which is Brandon and Rickard Stark. I've had a few questions from my patrons already, but I think what I want to do is start, if we can, with Rickard and then move on to Brandon. And want to do it a little bit like a character study, just to try and get under their skins, understand what was driving them, what was motivating them, and the like. LML, do you want to give us just a very high-level introduction to who is Rickard Stark?
Well, Rickard Stark is, of course, the father of Ned and Brandon, and he's another one of these characters that has died 20 years or so before the story, much like Rhaegar and Lyanna, and they heavily shape the story. And so as the first 3 books or so unfold, we really start to learn a lot about this generation of people that came before, that really, had a lot to do with Robert's Rebellion, because basically, as a writing conceit, when you're writing a good story, especially in fantasy or science fiction, you got to have good history, both, long-term world-building history, but more importantly, recent history. Because whatever you're doing right now, like in your life, it has to do with where you've been the last 20 years. And that's all the more true when you're dealing with kings and politics and wars. And so Rickard Stark is essentially, he's one of these players that really shapes things. And I know we're going to get into the Southron ambitions type talk today for sure. And so this is really, the Grand Northern Conspiracy, all that stuff. And I definitely think there's a range of possibilities there, but there's no question that Rickard was a political player. I think that's how we have to see him. We're not told a great deal about him, but I think the most significant thing about Rickard is that he was a Stark that was not doing the Ned thing, where he was just hibernating up north and forgetting about the South and trying to isolate himself. He was kind of the opposite. He was involved in Southern politics, and that's certainly, not to necessarily blame him, but that definitely was part of getting the Starks into the war of Robert's Rebellion and all of that mess with Aerys. So I'd say that's how I conceptualize him in the books.
Yeah, I think I would agree. So the thing which makes him stand out from all the other Starks is the extent of his ambitions and meddling and willingness to marry off his family to Southerners. That is the thing which makes him stand apart from the others. And I think we will get into that and what was motivating that in just 1 second. We did have a super chat just before we started. Brennan Barnes, thank you so much. $10, that's very generous. Thank you. This slight digression, but there's a link here. Characters we know little to nothing about from Rickard's time, like Lyanna Stark and Leighton Hightower, who, if any, will be significant to the story. So do we think that any of the characters like Rickard's wife, who is off screen pretty much for the entirety of the stories, do you think, LML, that she will have any significant role in what's here? And also Leighton Hightower, we could probably go off on quite a long conversation about Leighton Hightower, but do you think that there's a Hightower link that we need to be aware of?
I think you just went over my head a little bit. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Leighton Hightower, Rickard Stark, what?
Well, so the question is, there are a lot of characters when we're looking back to this period, 15, 20 years before the story we've got, who are mentioned, but then not much comes of them. Some of these characters, like Ashara Dane, we've made a big deal of. I've certainly made a video or two about Ashara Dane. Other characters like Leighton Hightower or Lyanna Stark, Rickard's wife, we don't. Is there a reason why? Are there reasons why these other characters are left behind, do you think? Is there someone we're missing, is what I think the real question is.
Is there someone we're missing? In Rickard's story, exactly? I mean, you're getting at something. I guess you might as well just out and say it.
Well, no, I'm not really. I'm sorry. It's not me trying to get at something. It's me explaining something poorly. I do apologize. I think the question is there a character from the olden days that we have is significant, but we've not really, the community has not really focused on them so far? Is there somebody back there that is significant, and so the question Brennan threw out a couple, Lyanna Stark potentially or Leighton Hightower, are they significant? We've just not talked about it, or is there someone else out there who is significant? We've just not talked about it.
Well, I think Ashara. No, I think it's the people we're looking at. I think it's people like Ashara Dane. Like in your video about why didn't Rhaegar and Lyanna say something, you started off by bringing up the fact that George has said Ashara Dane isn't nailed down, and she was one of Elia's ladies in waiting, and so I think and there's obviously Howland Reed. I mean, these are the people that we should be looking at for the missing clues. I don't know that. I mean, I do wonder what Lord Leighton's doing with his book of spells up in the tower. That's for sure. And I do think the Hightower stuff is one of those background pieces that is coming to the foreground. I think Euron, Sam, the Hightowers, all that Old Town stuff is coming together in a way that is going to be meaningful. But I don't know about, as far as history going back to the Robert's Rebellion, I think it's the pieces that we're looking at for the most part. I can't think of. I mean, it's hard to overlook somebody when you're looking at like people that have one line in the books, and we're like, we already made 10 videos about them. So
it's true. I've certainly made lots of videos about characters who haven't got huge amounts of screen time, as it were, certainly on the show and also in the books. I think I would agree with you. I think that the main characters, Brennan, to answer your question, the main characters that we have been focusing on are the significant characters in the events up to and around Robert's Rebellion. People like Ashara Dane, people like Howland Reed. I think there's a reason why the community is focused in on them. The one that I would pick out of the two that you mentioned there, I think Lyanna Stark, we're not told about her because she's not significant to the story. I'm sure she was to her family, but not to the story. Leighton Hightower and the Hightowers, I think there is something going on there. As LML said, as part of my go through my series of videos, my going through Robert's Rebellion and the like, one of the characters that I'm really looking forward to investigating a bit more is Gerald Hightower, who was Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and he went to the Tower of Joy, and then he stayed there, which is a slightly odd move, given the fact that the king was still elsewhere at the time, and he stayed there. Was there something going on there? Was he part of the circle who understood what was going on with Rhaegar? Those are questions I haven't fully answered yet, so I'm just leaving them as questions for now. But I think yes.
Those high towers.
Have you got an answer?
Oh, I was just going to say, those high towers are maddening. They are one of the most mysterious, not just because of all the rumors about sorcery, but about their persistent role in conspiracies involving the Targaryens, specifically the disappearance of the dragons and the dance of the dragons. Like, they were so heavily involved in that. They're one of those people that are they're just begging. They just invite conspiracy, and they're always around at these moments in a lot of the most heavy plots, even during the conquest, some of the things that happened at Old Town. I don't know. I really am looking forward to finding out more about the High Towers.
Yeah, and so I'm at the risk of sounding professional, I'm going to link this back to Rickard Stark. So the rumor was, and the rumor we get from Barbary Dustin, who is not always the most objective of witnesses, but she was around at the time. The rumor was that Maester Wallace, who was the maester up at Winterfell at that time, was secretly a Hightower bastard. And so he was the person that Barbary Dustin blames for starting to whisper these Southron ambitions into Rickard Stark's ear. So that seems to imply some kind of link in with the Maesters and potentially House Hightower in with the start of this move to establishing a block. Now, I think the question I would put to you on the back of that is, do you think, therefore, this block that Rickard was building, was that the end game? Was he just wanting to build a whole load of alliances, or do you think that there was more going on there?
Well, I think that there's an obvious need to strengthen alliances because of the instability of Aerys' rule. It had been going on for a while, and it was getting progressively worse. So you had, if you're one of the other lords of the Seven Kingdoms, you have every reason to begin to get nervous and take precaution. And before you get to the point where you're like, oh, I guess we have to rebel against the king, you better have already thought about this and laid some plans and taken some preparations and strengthened alliances. So they were doing a lot of long-term planning. I mean, marriage alliances and pacts and things that take time to develop. And they may not have known what was going to happen, but it was easy to see that everything was very unstable, and that at any moment there could be a need to call arms and rebel. So to me, it makes a lot of sense in a general sense. It doesn't even strike me as plotting when the king is breaking the feudal contract in so many ways as Aerys was. I think the lords have a right and even a duty to their own people to protect themselves and take measures as a wise ruler. So that's my take.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I want to just do a very quick shout out. Stephanie Peer, one of my patrons. I got your question on Patreon, and I will be answering it in a moment. Sorry, but I just picked up on something you said in the chat about the Disputed Lands, who is also in the chat, saying, I just watched all your videos over the last 2 days. They are amazing, guys. One of my favorite discoveries for myself over the last few months within this community has been the Disputed Lands. Crowfood's daughter, I had her on here a month or two ago, so you already know how good she is, but please do go check out her videos. But I think my take on that whole Northern Alliance is that I agree it was just prudent alliance building. But when you look at how big this potentially could have been, it's actually quite significant. So you get the North, and they were being linked with the Vale, because Ned had been sent there. That was also linked across to the Baratheons in the Stormlands, because the idea was that Lyanna was going to be marrying to Robert Baratheon. There was also the link across to the Tullys in the Riverlands, because the marriage from Brandon to Lysa, to Catelyn. And then there was also potentially another marriage from Lysa Tully across to Jaime Lannister. And when you start putting that together, you actually get a huge block of majority of the Seven Kingdoms. So this isn't just building little alliances to protect yourself so much as this is a majority vote if it ever came to a great council. So that's my view, and I think personally, I think that it wasn't that Rickard Stark was wanting the Iron Throne for himself or something. I think he was aiming to protect the North, and I think he was actually potentially looking to get independence for the North and use that as a bargaining chip in perhaps getting rid of Aerys. But that's slightly speculative, but I see no evidence of him wanting to claim power for himself in the South.
No, Robert, if I could just agree with you real quick. I think that the North declaring independence from the South is a ripe cherry. And when Robb and all of them decide to do it, it's the obvious thing to do. And really, as soon as the Targaryens ceased to have dragons, it was ripe for the plucking. At any point, the North could have rebelled. And really, if you want to be absolutely realistic, then they would have and should have rebelled as soon as they no longer had dragons. There was no reason to keep doing fealty to the South, given Moat Cailin and the kind of tactical advantage that it presents. And this, the lack of, it's just not worth it for the Southern kings to conquer the North. There's nothing there. It's pine cones, like Asha says at the Kingsmoot. There's just no reason. So basically, George wanted to use it as a plot device in Robb's arc. And so it didn't happen before then, but it was ripe to happen. And so for you to speculate that that would have been Rickard's move makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and this brings us over to a super chat from Kid28. Thank you very much. Who asked, do you think Rickard Stark was jockeying for King in the North and the North's independence? I think we've actually spent the last 5 minutes arguing that very point. So the answer, I think, in short, was yes. I don't think he was there trying to get himself power in the South. I think he was wanting independence for the North, and the way he saw that happening was by getting a power base that would allow him to get that independence, because they were stronger than the Targaryens' power base. Okay, let's just quickly go to a couple of questions from patrons. Now, Mary Hadley, one of my patrons, this is linking across to Lyanna, but it's a question about Rickard and the character of Rickard. Can you imagine what Rickard said to Lyanna after the incident of the Blue Roses? And how could she explain to him the circumstances? Do you imagine she lied or simply withheld information? Well, I'll kick off on that one, which is that I don't think she ever spoke to him face to face afterwards. I think she stayed down south. I think she stayed in the Riverlands. Rickard was up north at the time during the tourney at Harrenhal. He was the Stark in Winterfell, and he came down for the wedding, so for Brandon's wedding, so they wouldn't have met until then. So I think that what was basically the situation was that Brandon was the head of the Stark group when they were down in Harrenhal, and so he would have been the one who was effectively taking on the role of her father and actually having strong words with her, and we saw how strongly he felt about that. So that's my take. What do you think, LML, on to that, and do you have any thoughts on what he would have said if he had been there? Do you think he would have reacted differently to Brandon?
Well, yes, because Brandon is singularly hot-headed, and he has the kind of hot-headedness that only a 25-year-old or 20-year-old can, whatever his age was at that time. So I think even if Rickard had been as wild as Brandon as a young man, 20 years of experience is always going to temper that. So he might have thought about ways to use that for their advantage. Like, for example, what's the whole point of creating this big alliance? It's to isolate Aerys, right? Well, if Rhaegar is on the tipping point of basically calling a great council to depose his own father, and Lyanna and Rhaegar have fallen for each other, well, the first thing that I would have occurred to me to do if I was in that position of Brandon or Rickard was to explore the possibility of, well, Lyanna, how does Rhaegar feel about his dad? Oh, he thinks his dad's pretty unstable and is actually willing to take the throne. Then I'd start calculating. I was like, well, do I want the entire Targaryen dynasty off the throne, or do I want Aerys off the throne? And am I willing to fight a war to get rid of their whole dynasty when I could take a peaceful transition of power to Rhaegar? I would have probably explored that negotiation with Rhaegar to save the entire realm from being plunged into war. Right? I mean, does that make some sense to you, or am I missing something?
No, I agree with that 100%. I think that the whether or not Rickard knew it, the setup for the tourney at Harrenhal was there for Rhaegar to be launching a putsch against his father, so to speak, a little bit of a coup. Whether that was actually have a great council or speak to lots of people to set up a great council, I think is a bit of a nuance. That got thrown out of a window, that idea, for two things. Firstly, Aerys himself turned up, and then anyone who was slightly wavering was probably not going to be talking behind his back because they could see what he was like. And secondly, by what happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. So that idea that Rhaegar had, he left that to one side. We see that incidentally. Jamie remembers Rhaegar talking about this, saying, paths, we shouldn't look back. I had thought about doing something about my father, but we shouldn't think about paths not taken.
Well, what about this, Robert? What about if this is like an Arianne Doran Martell situation where Lyanna doesn't know all of Rickard's plans, and maybe if Rickard had clued Lyanna and the kids into some of the political maneuverings, then Lyanna would have taken that into consideration while running away with Rhaegar. She could have been like, "Hey, wait a minute," and just made the connections that basically I just made. But she wasn't maybe mindful of that, because she probably didn't know all of Rickard's plans. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think that Rickard told Brandon his plans, and I think the evidence for that is that curious bit with Who Dances with Ashara. You get Brandon going up and having a word with her, and saying, "Here, Ned, you dance with her." I think that the most likely explanation of what was going on there was that he was trying to find a match for Ned, who, being a second son, couldn't really imagine marrying the daughter of one of the top houses, but a medium influence house that happens to be quite influential at the time. Yeah, there's a chance there. So I think that was Brandon actually following through on what his father was wanting. But I think that he did not have the political nous. I think that he instead, just as we saw, got very hot under the collar about what happened with Lyanna. And I think that was, as much as anything, that was one of the things which stopped it all from going on. So I agree. I don't think that Lyanna knew what her father was up to. And the bit I'm not sure is the extent to which Ned was aware. I think probably a bit, but we have to remember that Ned spent most of his time actually in the Eyrie.
Well, Lyanna's the one that matters. The question is, what did Lyanna know when she ran off with Rhaegar? Because it seems like if she had known more, she might have been able to put those connections together, and her and Rhaegar could have figured it out and be like, wait a minute, Rhaegar, you have a bunch of allies here. But the AI, it really, it's good writing, because the idea that Brandon missed an opportunity because he was too young and hot-headed is just exactly the kind of shit that happens, in the real world. So I'd say that's pretty good writing, and it's the kind of thing that George loves to do. He loves to think about the roads not taken, and he loves to show you those roads and be like, oh, look, yes, it could have worked out if everyone had just done this, but instead Marillion stands up, calls out to Tyrion at the door. Tyrion recognizes Catelyn, and everything goes down at the end of the crossroads. It's like he loves to do that stuff.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, Lyanna not knowing makes a huge amount of sense, and it's the lack of knowledge of what's going on. I am convinced, it was one of my recent videos, I'm convinced that Lyanna and Rhaegar didn't know what was going on with Brandon rushing down to King's Landing and then Rickard going down there and the whole thing leading to war until it was way too late. That just makes sense to me. The lack of understanding and knowledge of what is going on is something that we underestimate a lot when we're talking about this kind of novel. It's the distances are huge. The communication is incredibly limited. From ravens, there's not squillions of ravens all over the place. Ravens just go from the most important people to the most important people. The rest is passed on by gossip, and gossip can take weeks, months, years to get from one place to another. So the lack of information is really quite significant here. I just want to very quickly pick up on a couple of super chats that have come through. Oracle of Raylor, thank you very much. That's very kind. Just doing some, I think that's hype and love, which is appropriate given Kyle was in the chat earlier. And I did have another one, if I can just quickly find it. Shadow Fox, thank you so much, £5. The ones not in the possible Southron alliance was the Crownlands, Dawn, and the Reach, and the Iron Islands, but they're a world of their own. These all had direct links to the crown, not done by chance. I think, yes, I would agree. I think that the people setting up this Southron alliance, if that's what we're going to call it, they knew what they were doing. They were picking off the people who were most likely to be part of their alliance. Dawn was very clearly tied in with the crown, so that makes sense. The Tullys were clearly loyal, so and obviously the Targaryens themselves. So I think that there was a start of a move towards them with Ned and Ashara, but no, they went for the easy pickings first, and the link across with Jaime was very much I think opportunistic, given the fact that everybody knew that there was a huge breach being carved between Aerys and Tywin. So yes, I would agree with you completely that this was canny political maneuvering to try and get the right people into the alliance.
Yeah, because think about it, it's like this isn't even hardly a conspiracy. This is like the lord of one house and the lord of another finding a chance to talk. They both realize they're both concerned about Aerys a little bit, and they just begin speaking about betrothals, and they would both understand what that means. Like, hey, let's build some strength between ourselves just in case, like you don't have to say it. You don't have to talk about rebellion. You're just building strategic alliances. I mean, you have to understand how these conversations and how these things work out. Like, this is not like an advanced Peter Baelish style conspiracy here. This is similarly just like-minded lords realizing that the king is unstable, and you're always looking to build alliances as a lord. It's just that at this time they began to look outside of their own region and they started to build alliances out of the region to other great houses. So this is just the kind of thing where if Aerys stabilizes and never does anything crazy or dies one day and Rhaegar takes power, you don't need to launch a rebellion, and you just have all these great marriage alliances. But this is just fortifying yourself and preparing so that when the shit goes down, you better be ready, like Cypress Hill would say.
Wow, I would ask for an encore, but I don't think the world is ready.
You better be ready.
I just want to go across to another super chat. This is from B1 Mary. I just want to read this one. It says, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for your thoughts and prayers of recovery. Surgery went well. I have 2 weeks of recovery and then should know if it worked. Again, thanks all. Best wishes. It's wonderful to as part of the community that there are people going through good times and people going through bad times, and that's wonderful news to hear. Thank you, and thank you for the super chat, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, great news, B1 Mary. Nice to hear.
Okay, let's move on to thinking about Rickard and Brandon. Now, LML, you were teasing me that you had a fantastic quote that you just got lined up ready to go. That sort of shows us a lot about the character of both of them. Do you want to do that now, as we're sort of starting to transition from Rickard onto Brandon?
Only a man like you would be so proud of such an act. This is Catelyn speaking to Jaime. I told you, there are no men like me. Answer me this, Lady Stark. Did your Ned ever tell you the manner of his father's death? Or his brother's? They strangled Brandon while his father watched, and they killed Lord Rickard as well. An ugly tale, and 16 years old. Why was he asking about it now? Killed, yes, but how? The cord or the axe, I suppose. Jaime took a swallow, wiped his mouth. No doubt Ned wished to spare you. His sweet young bride, if not quite a maiden. Well, you wanted truth. Ask me. We made a bargain. I can deny you nothing. Ask. Dead is dead. I do not want to know this. Brandon was different from his brother, wasn't he? He had blood in his veins instead of cold water, more like me. Brandon was nothing like you. If you say so. You and he were to wed. He was on his way to River Run when... Strange how telling it still made her throat grow tight after all these years. When he heard about Lyanna and went to King's Landing instead, it was a rash thing to do. She remembered how her own father had raged when the news had been brought to River Run. The gallant fool was what he called Brandon. Jaime poured the last half cup of wine. He rode into the Red Keep with a few companions, shouting for Prince Rhaegar to come out and die. But Rhaegar wasn't there. Aerys sent his guards to arrest them all for plotting his son's murder. The others were Lord's sons too, it seems to me. Ethan Glover was Brandon's squire, Catelyn said. He was the only one to survive. The others were Joffrey Mallister, Kyle Royce, Elbert Arryn, John Arryn's nephew and heir. It was queer how she still remembered the names after so many years. Aerys accused them of treason and summoned their fathers to court to answer the charge, with the sons as hostages. When they came, he had them murdered without trial, fathers and sons both. There were trials, of a sort. Lord Rickard demanded trial by combat, and the king granted the request. Stark armored himself as for battle, thinking to duel one of the Kingsguard. Me, perhaps. Instead, they took him to the throne room and suspended him from the rafters, while two of Aerys' pyromancers kindled a blaze beneath him. The king told him that fire was the champion of House Targaryen, so all Lord Rickard needed to do was to prove himself innocent of treason was, well, not burn. When the fire was blazing, Brandon was brought in. His hands were chained behind his back, and around his neck was a wet leathern cord attached to a device the king had brought from Tyrosh. His legs were left free, though, and his longsword was set down just beyond his reach. The pyromancers roasted Lord Rickard slowly, banking and fanning the fire carefully to get a nice even heat. His cloak caught first and then his surcoat, and soon he wore nothing but metal and ashes. Next he would start to cook, Aerys promised, unless his son could free him. Brandon tried, but the more he struggled, the tighter the cord constricted around his throat. In the end, he strangled himself. As for Lord Rickard, the steel of his breastplate turned cherry red before the end, and his gold melted off his spurs and dripped down into the fire. I stood at the foot of the Iron Throne in my white armor and white cloak, filling my head with thoughts of Cersei. Afterward, Gerald Hightower himself took me aside and said, "You swore a vow to guard the king, not to judge him." That was the White Bull, loyal to the end, and a better man than me, all agree. Aerys... Catelyn could taste bile at the back of her throat. The story was so hideous she suspected it had to be true. Aerys was mad, the whole realm knew it, but if you would have me believe you slew him to avenge Brandon Stark, I made no such claim. The Starks were nothing to me. I will say I think it passing odd that I'm loved by one for a kindness I never did, and reviled by so many for my finest act. At Robert's coronation, I was made to kneel at the royal feet beside Grand Maester Pycelle and Varys the eunuch, so that he might forgive us our crimes before he took us into his service. As for your Ned, he should have kissed the hand that slew Aerys, but he preferred to scorn the arse he found sitting on Robert's throne. I think Ned Stark loved Robert better than he loved his brother or his father, or even you, my lady. He was never unfaithful to Robert, was he? Jaime gave a drunken laugh. Come, Lady Stark, don't you find all this terribly amusing? There you go.
That's yeah. I think that's probably the bit where we hear the most about those two characters, and I think it says a lot about the knowledge of those two characters that the torture that was designed with their characters in mind. So it was designed knowing that Brandon was going to be effectively strangling himself in order to, or not just effectively, actually strangling himself in order to try and free his father, because he was too rash to stop and think, actually, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to help. So thank you for that. I really enjoyed listening to that. It's a fascinating little section, particularly coming from Jamie's perspective as somebody who was standing by and watching it. I want to come to one of the questions from one of my patrons, which links in with this. And this is Stephanie Peer, who I said I would come to this in a moment. The way Brandon's character is described in the books makes me think that that's how Rickon would be if he gets to grow up. Not really a question, but something that had struck her. Do you think that Rickon is a bit like Brandon?
Yeah, I'd have to say he's probably got some of that wolf blood, right? I mean, not only that, but we've, as you discussed a little bit on the Rickon Wild Wolf live stream, he's connected with his skin changing at a very early age, much younger than all the other Starks. So that's going to shape him growing up. His wolf is the wildest. He obviously has a wild personality. He's suffered a lot of trauma. He's had his parents taken away from him at a very young age. And now he's on Skagos with the cannibals and the horny goats and Osha the wildling. So I was typing in to get a comment during that stream that a good comparison is Varamir Sixskins, as far as when you want to look at how dark it can go with a wild young child skin changer who's not well supported or understood. Varamir at age 6 killed his brother, who was 2. And he did this by skin changing into the family dog and killing his brother. And you get the idea from the retelling that this might have been one of the first skin changings that Varamir ever did. And you get the idea that it was something that he didn't really understand. So I think I have the ages right. Varamir was 6 and his brother was 2. Or was Varamir the younger one?
I think that's right, but it's been a while.
Varamir was older. Varamir was older and runty, and when the younger brother came along, the parents favored him more, right? And so I think where it's intimated that Varamir became jealous, essentially. And so when you have a young child, I made the comparison that normally a 6 and a 2-year-old might throw toys at each other if they get into a fight, when siblings fight. But if one of those siblings is a skin changer, then that childhood anger that's irrational and wild could manifest into an incident like that. And so when we think of Rickon growing up basically on his own in trauma, and he's got this connection to this wild wolf, you could see any range of bad or wild behavior. And I think Brandon Stark might be the best possible outcome that we could hope for. It could definitely get worse and darker.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Rickon is he's in wanton need of parental control at the moment, if you can put it that way. He's we often think of Bran as not having the father figure. He's denied it, all the rest of it, but he had Maester Luwin for a long time, who was there guiding him and trying to get him to grow up and be the head Stark that he had to be. But Rickon was always just left to be slightly wild. There wasn't anybody really looking out for him or after him, even when he was in Winterfell, not ignoring when he also went off into the wilds, and then heading off to Skagos, which is known to be a wild place, with a wildling and a wolf that is incredibly wild. This is a recipe for wildness, let's say. When he comes back, he is
For
not
an
going to
invasion of cannibals riding on the backs of enormous horny goats. That's what it's a recipe for. Sorry, go ahead.
no. I think you're right, but I think what I would say is that what we're not going to see, as in the show, is a clean cut Rickon coming back. This is going to be a Rickon who has been out there hunting with wolves and horny goats, and so when Davos finds him, if he does find him, he is not going to find a refined lord's son. He's going to find a feral beast, I would imagine.
Yeah, basically, I'm excited to see it. I think Martin's writing, when it borders on the edge of wildness like that, is some of the best writing that he does. Some of the Varamir stuff and the Bran stuff north of the Wall, it's just really visceral. He has a way of doing that. He loves that horror edge to the fantasy, and so I'm like the whole bit at Queen's Crown with Bran showing us like 1%. One little drop of what the Warg King would have been like. Like, for example, so you have Jon's outside of Queen's Crown, right? He's with the wildlings, and this is when he's still with the wildlings officially, and they've climbed across the wall, and this is right before he breaks from them and rides away in the middle of the night. There's a rainstorm, and Bran and Hodor and all them are in the tower that's surrounded by that moat, and there's that submersed walkway under the water or whatever, and there's a lightning storm. And basically the peak of it, you've got Bran sitting in there as the skin changer, the warg prince, and he's manipulating his wolf out in the field of battle. And with only one wolf, he's able to like rip out the throats of a dozen men and kill a bunch of people, completely mess up their plans, and break Jon free. And so you hear these tales of the warg kings and the ancient Starks, which are implied as wargs, and you think of multiple wargs with multiple wolves and ravens and stuff. Like, this is a terrifying power, and what Martin is doing is he's waiting to unveil the full force of skin changer power, but he's giving it to us in drips and drabs so we can see where it's going. And the Varamir prologue, Bran's experience at Queen's Crown, these are little things that show us where it can go, but ultimately you have to project with those mechanics in mind and realize what a warg king can really be, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And the Varamir chapter, for those who have forgotten it, because it's quite easy to forget, because it seems quite disjointed from the rest of the story. George R. R. Martin didn't just drop that in for no reason. The reason he put that in was to teach us about what skin changing is about and what a skin changer is capable of, and what the rules are of that kind of thing, whether or not you follow them. And that is because there are a number of characters for whom this is going to be very important. Bran is obviously there, and one of them, but also a lot of the other Starks. Jon, it's going to be very important for. Arya, certainly quite important for. Rickon, definitely, I think, will be. And I would also throw in, though I'm not going to go down this wormhole this time, Euron into that mix. So I think that George R. R. Martin included that chapter because he wanted us to understand about what being a skin changer actually is. I want to very quickly go over to the chat. We had a couple of super chats. I want to get to them. Brennan Barnes, thank you very much, very generous, saying, what happened to Wallace Flowers, in your opinion? This is a fantastic question. So this is Maester Wallace, who is the maester that was there when Rickard Stark, Ned's father, was there. He was the one who allegedly started all this by whispering into Rickard Stark's ear about with South Run ambitions and all the rest of it. And yet he's obviously not there in the present day. Now, he has been replaced by Maester Luwin, and Maester Luwin came up from Riverrun. So he came up either with or after Cat. So this is we don't know is the short answer to the question about what happened. In terms of speculation, what I would go, I'd love to hear your thoughts in a moment, LML. I would go with either perhaps he just died. These things do happen. There shouldn't be a big mystery about everything. Perhaps he had to be replaced. Or perhaps there is some combination of Ned realizing that what one of the causes of all of this was this maester and not wanting him around, and Cat who, let's not forget, went up north to a place that she didn't know anyone with a completely newborn baby, would have wanted some familiar faces around her. It makes sense given the fact that Ned was keen to indulge her with things like building a sept in Winterfell, unheard of before, that he would have encouraged and allowed her maester to come up as well. So I think that there's a combination of all of those things. We don't know exactly what happened, but I think that it makes sense to me that the reason why we ended up with Maester Lewin is because that was with the cat link, and whether or not Maester Wallace died, left of his own volition, or got kicked out, I don't know. Do you have any particular thoughts on that one?
I really don't. You've covered it better than I would have been able to. I haven't really thought about that ahead of time, so I would just be stumbling and trying to say what you said again. No, I agree. I do want to pick up the second super chat that you're going back for from Lindy Whitman, though, $5, who asks, why do so many people think a second Lightbringer has to be forged for Azor Ahai Reborn? Prophecy says they'll draw forth a sword, not forge a sword. So I would say that, first of all, it's completely up in the air whether or not we need a new sword or an old sword or a reforged sword. I'd say any of those are possible. But the specific wording of drawing forth a sword from the fire could simply refer to a smith forging his sword in the fire, because the Azor Ahai legend has him actually forging the sword in the sacred fires and tempering it in the blood, and that's kind of the important part of the myth. So it's logical to imagine that we need to reproduce that somehow. But I think it's absolutely wide open. I think we could see, it could be that any Valyrian steel sword consecrated with blood and magic can become a Lightbringer. It's just that, like, for example, if you could make a regular sword into a Lightbringer, that's what Beric does. I mean, Beric cuts his own magical blood, washes it on the sword, and that makes it a flaming sword, but it's not, the steel isn't worthy, and so it breaks. So if Beric had had a Valyrian steel sword in his hand and done the same thing, he would have had a hell of a weapon. He would have had a burning, indestructible magic sword. So it could be that Jon's Longclaw or any Valyrian steel sword can get lit on fire once you have like magical fire blood, which Jon coincidentally may very well have when he wakes up. Or it could be that we need Dawn or Ned's Ice, which is now Widow's Wail or Oathkeeper. Maybe that's a specific one, but I think all of those possibilities are open. What do you think, Robert?
I think, and this has been my view for a long time, is that once the show's finished and the books are finished, we are still going to be out here in the community debating who, if anyone, was Azor Ahai and what, if anything, was Lightbringer. So I think that what we'll find is George R. R. Martin focuses so much more on the belief and what happens with what that drives people to than the actual truth of prophecy. That seems to matter a whole lot less to him. So I think we'll probably find that we get 2, 3, 4 potential swords that you could say could be Lightbringer. You will have thematic swords that people to talk about, whether I know Gemma from Secret Citadel has got I think a wonderful theory about Rhaegar and Lyanna, and Rhaegar plunging his sword into Lyanna, as it were, to bring forth to bring forth Azor Ahai. I think that's a really
that's actually a really old theory. I mean, that's R plus L equals Lightbringer from like 2014 from Schmendrick. That's actually the essay that got me into writing essays. R plus L equals Lightbringer.
Well, then Gemma, I take back any credit I gave you.
No, I didn't mean it that way. Of course, I love Gemma. I'm just saying that's a very Rhaegar's penis as Lightbringer is that's classic stuff.
Excellent. Well, there you go. I very tactfully avoided using that word, but LML went straight in for it. So,
I had a whole section in my first essay called "Sex and Swordplay." It's the final section, and it's all about that symbolism, about how part of one layer of the Lightbringer forging Azor Ahai Nissa Nissa myth is Azor Ahai impregnating Nissa Nissa to create a magic child, which is exactly what they did with Jon. So that's That's absolutely. It's a really interesting topic. And I mean, really anybody who studies it, the books, you'll start to see that. I mean, you can't even give credit to one person for that idea. Like it's something that appears when you start to look at it. So
yeah, I would agree, but I think my main point is that there are going to be many different things that we'll be able to argue cogently could be Lightbringer, or people who could be Azor Ahai. At this stage, the reason why we're saying that that there could be lots of different people is there are lots of people you could make a case for. You could make a case for John or Danny, or as you say, you could even make a case for someone like Beric. It's there are lots of people who have this role, and I don't think that the literal fulfillment of prophecy is what this story is about.
And real quickly, Robert, before we go back to Rickard and Brandon, because I know you want to get back on topic because you like to be almost professional.
Only almost.
When I was after Worldcon, when Ashea got her question about Dark Sister answered, we did a couple live streams right after that. And when I was on with Aziz, we started counting Valyrian steel weapons that were available, and we did get to 13. So there is a potential for the recreation of the last hero with a dozen companions with 12 or 13 Valyrian steel weapons that could all potentially become Lightbringers. So if you like your tinfoil and you want to see all the flaming swords, there are 13 weapons available. And I mean, not counting like Bright Roar has to get found from Valyria, but like we just went around and counted, all the ones that are in play.
Okay, so I think that's fair. I think that's interesting because I would wonder, I'm not going to go down this route, but I would wonder where you draw that line between what is in play and what is not in play. But you're right. I want to bring this back on track. I could follow that for quite some time. But we've got a super chat before I give my normal sort of quick update as to what's going on with the channel. Aka Ingmar has a super chat asking, Robert, you had come up with a theory of Littlefinger being the one who told the lie about Lyanna. That's in a video from 2 or 3 weeks ago. Why would Brandon believe a person like Baelish? Now, this, I have to say, is the question that I've had most on the back of that video. So actually, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to try and spell out why I think that's the case. And the fact is that the mirror for this, in terms of I think, literarily, is the lie that Littlefinger said to Catelyn when he was talking about the cat's paw dagger. He blamed it on the Lannisters, and she believed him. Now, she knew him well. She knew he was a slippery character. She may well have heard the rumors that he was claiming that he'd taken her virginity. There is no real reason why she should be trusting him. However, she immediately believed him. And the reason why, in human terms, she immediately believed him was that she was going all that way because she wanted to find some proof that the Lannisters were responsible. And so the moment that she got that proof, the moment that Littlefinger gave that proof, she believed it because it was confirmation bias, if you want to be using this the sort of the psychological terms. That was what was going on. Now, what was happening back with, I believe, with Baelish and Brandon, we saw, got incredibly heated. He had to be physically restrained from confronting Rhaegar simply because Rhaegar had put the flowers on Lyanna's lap, which was clearly a very heavily laden symbol, but it was a statement of intent. And Brandon was incensed about this, and therefore, if he heard a rumor, or if he heard somebody tell him that, you know what, that dastardly Rhaegar's gone and done, he's gone and kidnapped your sister Lyanna, he already thought that was what Rhaegar wanted to do. So it wasn't like Littlefinger made up some lie that, just like, why on earth would you believe that? That was what Brandon thought Rhaegar was wanting to do. And so we don't know the entire circumstances around where that might have happened or how that might have happened, but it's entirely possible that Littlefinger wasn't the only witness. There might have been other people say, oh yeah, I saw them riding off in that direction. The moment that he found that they were riding off together, his mind will immediately have leaped, because he was that kind of person, to the idea that Rhaegar abducted Lyanna, and all it would have taken was Littlefinger to confirm it for him, and that is a lie that he would have been wanting to believe. So that is my take on why Brandon would believe Littlefinger. LML, I don't know whether you've watched those videos in any detail.
I have.
Do you have any
And
thoughts on that?
I do, and I will reiterate what I was saying to you right before we went live, which is that the way to solving all of these kind of mysteries is by understanding the characters and their hearts in conflict. Martin broadcasts that from the mountaintops like all the time. So you know, some of the, when you're trying to work out your theories and stuff, you definitely need to think about all the logistics and stuff, but it really starts with narrative sense and the motivations of the characters. And when you talk about Littlefinger telling Brandon a lie he wanted to hear, that's exactly what Littlefinger would do. And that's exactly what good liars do, is they tell people what they want to hear. Varys uses the same tactic all the time. So this is, again, why to me Martin is, you know, a good writer in this aspect, is because he really understands, and he always thinks about the motivations of the characters, what they want, what their goals are. When he talks about everyone's the hero of their own story, what he's really saying is, like, you have to take a minute and put yourself in that person's head. Think about, what is that person trying to achieve? What are they doing? They're an individual actor in the play. And so your theory is really strong, Robert, because you do a good job of taking all that into consideration. And I feel like the backbone of these theories that you're doing about Robert's Rebellion is always relying on the characters and the narrative sense of them. So that's why I find them very convincing. So good job.
Thank you very much. So just going to pick up on a couple of quick things in the chat. Andreas Martin says, holy, who is LML and why is he so sexy? So I just thought I'd throw them out for you. He clearly is a sexy man, particularly with that horny hat on.
The horny wolf, yes.
But Josh Koff, thank you so much for your super chat. $50, that is incredibly generous. That's thank you so much. Saying, I think I screwed up my Patreon, so hopefully this works instead. Really loving your video, sir. Thank you. Thank you. LML, you too, actually. Josh, if there's a problem with Patreon, I will have a look into it, and we'll see whether we can sort that one out. But I would just say, if you're a patron of mine, or doesn't just have to be me, maybe you're a patron of LML or someone else, Patreon have been having payment problems over the last 2 or 3 months. The creators are aware of this. Where we know about it, I certainly, when I've known about it, I've tried to do something about it. But Patreon have been having problems where they've just been rejecting some payments that have been set up and working perfectly happily for months sometimes. So if you have been having those problems with anyone you're a patron of, then, well, first of all, have a check, see whether or not that has happened to you. The advice seems to be just try doing it with a different card. So that's just a little bit of advice, but do check out what Patreon say. If Patreon isn't working for you, it's probably their fault. Apparently they've solved the problems, but it's almost certainly not your fault, if that makes sense. But Josh, thank you. That's incredibly generous of you, that super chat. I wanted, as I always do, just to do a very quick rundown of what's coming up on my channel. First of all, as we've been talking about my series on Rhaegar, Robert, Lyanna, and all of that, that's going to be carrying on every week for, I think, the foreseeable future. I've got at least 2 more videos on the rebellion itself, probably 3 videos. I've got some thoughts I've got coming up about the Tower of Joy, just digging into what was actually going on there. And I've got another video that I'm really looking forward to do about Dany and the Lemon Tree and the Red Door and what on earth was going on there. So I've got quite a few more videos lined up in that series. Patrons, I was talking about it a moment ago. I always say this, but thank you so much. I cannot carry on doing what I do without your support. It's what has allowed me to ramp up my output over the last few months, and that your support is what does that. So thank you so much. If you are interested in becoming a patron and supporting in Deep Geek or getting access to some of the exclusive audio stuff I do over there, please do check out the link. There's a link down there, or have a go to Patreon, patreon.com/indeepgeek. And the final thing I would say is my second channel, which is called The Well Told Tale, which is me doing audio narrations of what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. That we've finished our first story there, which was The War of the Worlds. That was 9 episodes, averaging about 3/4 of an hour per episode, uninterrupted by adverts in the middle. And we just started this yesterday. In fact, I uploaded part 1 of Frankenstein, which I'm really excited. It's a novel that I love, but going back and rereading it, I was blown away by the literary quality of it, the word choices and the levels of detail and nuance that's in there, that considering Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was 18 when she wrote it, is just mind-blowing. It's really, really good. So if you're at all interested in that, please go and check out The Well Told Tale. Again, link down in the description. But LML, what's going on with you? Is there what should people tune into or look out for with you?
Yeah, so I've done the same thing as you. I've recently started a second channel. That one's called Between Two Weirwoods, with the number 2 in the middle there, Between Two Weirwoods, and that is my live panel discussion show. I started doing it on my Lucifer Means Lightbringer channel, but I've decided to bifurcate and separate because I was just having too many different types of videos on my Lucifer Means Lightbringer channel. I think it was confusing some people. And I'd also like to see how much support Between Two Weirwoods gets on its own. It's very different. So you gave me a very nice recommendation earlier, and you were talking about mythical astronomy of Ice and Fire. And that's where I deal with symbolism and mythology and folklore, and the way that Martin creates parallels between his background folklore and his main characters as sort of incarnations of these archetypes that he's created. That's the kind of stuff I do in mythical astronomy. It's very heady. It's it's kind of trippy. It's like, one person described my podcast as being like listening to Tool, or getting high almost, something. I mean, it's symbolism. It does something to your brain. But Between Two Weirwoods is totally different. This is a channel I started after going to Con of Thrones, doing a bunch of discussion panels, which, just to be clear, a panel is basically when 4 people sit at a table, they've got a discussion topic, and they just sort of have a live discussion. And I had so much fun doing those, Robert, that I wanted to keep that energy going. It seemed like a great format to sort of break some new ground in the fandom, since we've covered so many things. When we discuss some of these deeper topics in the stories, it brings out some of the more hidden and subtle layers. And so it can be anything. The topic can be absolutely anything. So the Between Two Weirwoods channel is basically me inviting guests on, picking a topic, and we go about 2 hours and we have a big old discussion. Sometimes there's a little more scripting and outlining beforehand. Sometimes it's fairly loose. It really just depends on the topic. Like, for example, I've invited Robert on 2 panels that will be coming in the next couple of months. One is going to be about RLJ and the Tower of Joy. And it's essentially a topic that I've mostly ignored. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Robert on and a couple other people that are really deep on this topic. And we're going to see if we can't boil down to the most likely range of possibilities. And we're going to do that after Robert's completed his series, so that he can sort of work through his complete train of thought there and then bring that to the table. And then we're going to do another one, which I just pitched to everybody today, called Mechanics of Magic. And we're going to talk about all the magic in the story and how things work, glass candles, weirwoods, all that stuff. And I've got some great guests for that one. So I've got a couple moderators. It looks like dropping the link for Between Two Weirwoods channel in the chat. So if everybody would go and subscribe to the channel, I would appreciate it. It's only a couple weeks old, only a few hundred subscribers, just getting started. So this Sunday, we will be having our first live stream on that channel. So if you want to be a part of the live stream this Sunday, you got to subscribe to Between Two Weirwoods, and it's going to be on religion. That will be the topic: religion in A Song of Ice and Fire influences from other world, real world religions, as well as the way that the religions in the story affect the characters. So that's what I got going on.
Excellent. And I would highly recommend you check out Between Two Weirwoods, not just because I will be on it a couple of times in the future, but LML picks out some excellent people to have on there. In fact, I was bigging up Disputed Lands, Crowfood's daughter, a little bit earlier in this stream, and I picked up on her work through LML, who recommended her. So please do go and check out what he does. Let's quickly go over to the chat. We had a couple of super chats. Ricardo Guira, thank you very much. Do you want to answer this one quickly, LML? Will Jon Snow meet Lady Stoneheart?
Well, there's a lot of narrative sense behind that happening, but they're a long way away from each other. So how would that happen? Lady Stoneheart would have to come north, or Jon would have to come pretty far south. So I can't immediately see the strokes that would make that happen, but I do think Jon will be coming at least to Winterfell once he's resurrected in the books, just as he did in the show. So it's really a question of how long Stoneheart lasts. See, I kind of doubt that Stoneheart is going to survive the encounter with Jaime and Brienne and whatever goes on in that cave. I think that might be the end of the line for Stoneheart. But if I'm wrong and she keeps going, then it would make a lot of sense for Jon and Stoneheart to meet and for something to happen there. But it's pretty down the line. How would that happen, Robert, in your opinion?
Well, I think that she is clearly on a revenge trip, and I think that the revenge trip that she is on is largely mirroring what in the show they've used for Arya. So I think that they've kind of, as they do, they've kind of tried to take some of her storyline and put it into Arya. So, for example, I could see that Lady Stoneheart might be behind retribution against Walder Frey rather than Arya. So that would work for me. And if she's therefore then working her way through in retribution for things, the question is, at what point does her story arc naturally end? I think that naturally ends when she discovers that actually her daughters are still alive. And so perhaps for me, yes, I see the narrative sense of her meeting Jon Snow, but I think perhaps it makes more narrative sense for me if she meets either Sansa or Arya. Maybe it's actually Arya, because Arya will probably be coming back to Winterfell from Braavos and going on a roughly similar path. So I don't know. That's my gut instinct, is that
I like that. I think that would be the kind of thing that would allow the ghost that is Stoneheart to like take that last breath and like let it go, is like seeing that some of her children are alive. That would be therapeutic too, quite honestly. Like, as much bad shit has happened to Catelyn and the Stark family, dude, let her like permanently die with the knowledge that some of her kids are alive. That would be nice.
Yeah, I agree.
Not too much to ask, George.
I think it's what is driving her is clearly a need for vengeance for wrongs done on her family, and finding out that Jon Snow is alive is not going to solve that for her, because she didn't ever have the best of relationships with him. It's her own children that's the issue. I just want to go across quickly to the chat. We've had a super chat from Maura Lee, $50. Thank you so much, Maura. I don't know whether you spotted, I was on Kyle's, as you know, I was on Kyle's stream earlier today, and he and I both wanted to express our personal gratitude to you for your immense support for both of us, and I just wanted to reiterate that here to you now. So thank you, not just for this super chat here, but for all of your support and friendship to both Kyle and myself over the last while. It's been absolutely immense. So thank you, just as a personal thank you. LML, can we come on to Brandon? Now, when we were talking briefly before this stream, we were talking about whether there is any kind of overarching sort of thematic stuff or any imagery that is associated with these characters? And you said that there is some stuff there that perhaps we could look out for with Brandon. Could you want to just sort of elucidate a bit on that point?
Yeah, so it's this idea. Jamie introduced this idea of Ned having water in his blood, in his veins, whereas Brandon actually has hot blood like Jamie. And Jamie's dead right. Like when Catelyn is like, "Oh, he's nothing like you," she's wrong. Brandon is a lot like Jamie. They're very similar. You know, so this basically the idea is that you know, there's this, we think of the Starks as icy people, right? For the most part, like they're associated with the North. And Ned, you know, is when Robert greets Ned, he says, "It's good to see that frozen face of yours." And then we go down into the crypts and there's all this icy language. And, you know, that's the way we think of the North, the Starks of the North. They have the sigil of the direwolf on a field of white, which represents snow. So, but the thing is, there's this undercurrent of fiery dragon symbolism all over Winterfell. For example, the famous Winterfell dragon that Bran sees through his wolf when Winterfell is burning, and the wolf looks up and sees a fiery serpent whose breath was a river of flame, which a lot of people interpret as foreshadowing for Jon Snow being the sort of hidden dragon at Winterfell, right? Which I essentially agree with. And that sort of symbolism runs all through Winterfell. They've got the hot pools, and the hot pools that pump all through the castle are compared to blood by 3 or 4 different people. I mean, it's right in Catelyn's first chapter. Her chambers are the hottest, and you know it's just compared to a bloodstream a bunch of times. So we've got this cold castle, and we've got cold people that have cold water in their veins. But then we've also got these hot pools that are like hot blood. And we have a few Starks that have this wolf blood that are hot-tempered people like Brandon and Lyanna a little bit and Arya. So it's interesting. Basically, it's an ice and fire symbolism. That's the easy way to think about it. This is a song of ice and fire. And we always think about the Starks as being ice and the dragons and the Targaryens as fire. But there is a fiery dragon line of symbolism hidden at Winterfell. And at the very least, it represents Jon. But I could say more conceptually, it represents the idea that ultimately to end the long night, you have to sing the song of ice and fire. Ice and fire elements are both important. They have to be united in some way. And the Starks are obviously tied to the last hero mythology and the Night King mythology and the Long Night mythology. And so it's no coincidence that we have all these dragons coming to the wall. Maester Aemon, Bloodraven, Jon Targaryen Snow himself. Soon Daenerys will be at the wall. So this is basically, to get back to Brandon Stark, Brandon Stark represents this fiery line of Starkness that exists. And it shouldn't be overlooked because it is there and it is important. And I'll let you respond to that. But there's one other thing about Brandon that I wanted to talk about, which is related to Brandon of the Bloody Blade. But go ahead and respond to what I was saying.
I think there's not much I'd want to add to that. Actually, I agree with you completely about this idea of it being the song of ice and fire, and it's the merging of the two, or the balance of the two, that is the crucial part in resolving this story, and that is summed up by Jon, but there are other kind of archetypes of that around the place. And I think this idea of Winterfell, I'd not really thought of it like that before, but yes, this it's very cold but then hot, burning hot on the inside is a wonderful image for that. So yeah, nothing much to add to that. I thought that was a great pearls of wisdom. What was the second thing you're wanting to say?
And I will just say that is me sort of encapsulating the Winterfell symbolism in 60 seconds. But if you do like that train of thought and you want to hear the full thing, that is in the Moons of Ice and Fire series, which then continues into the Blood of the Others series. And that's all my stuff about the Others and ice magic and the Starks. So, but the Brandon of the Bloody Blade thing is a curious tale, which may have to do with the origins of House Stark going back even before the Long Night events. And it's from the World of Ice and Fire, just a couple of lines. We're being told about 12 notable descendants of Garth the Green. And of course, Garth the Green supposedly might be the first man in Westeros or the first king of Westeros. And he's kind of described like the Jolly Green Giant. He's the legendary figure in the Reach. He's a standard green man fertility god. He's got stag antlers and green skin. He makes the plants grow and he gets everyone pregnant. Robert Baratheon is kind of a modern day incarnation of this Garth figure. So Garth has 12 sons or 12 children. Some of them are daughters, but one of them is called Brandon of the Bloody Blade, who, quote, drove the giants from the Reach and warred against the children of the forest, slaying so many at Blue Lake that it has been known as Red Lake ever since. Then we have another one where it's talking about Garth himself, and it says, the list is long and many are the legends, for there is scarce a noble house in the Reach that does not boast of descent from one of Garth Greenhand's countless children. Even the heroes of other lands and kingdoms are sometimes numbered among the offspring of the Greenhand. Brandon the Builder was descended from Garth by way of Brandon of the Bloody Blade, these tales would have us believe, whilst Lan the Clever was a bastard born to Floris the Fox, or in some tales Rowan Goldtree. So that's giving you, I mean, you see this guy named Brandon and you're like, oh, well, is that a Stark? And they're telling you straight up, well, some people believe he's an ancestor to Bran the Builder, which sort of puts him in the most remote history. That's why I'm saying possibly before the Long Night. And you've got a Stark in the south, essentially. So you can imagine this as before the Starks went north and founded Winterfell even. But the important thing about the name Brandon of the Bloody Blade and why that ties to Brandon Stark of the current story is think about that whole scene with Lady Barbary Dustin in the crypts with Theon in A Dance with Dragons. She's talking about Brandon and she's getting really lusty and she's talking about how she used to be young and beautiful and how Brandon took her virginity. And she talks about the bloody blade over and over again. And she's like, oh, Brandon loved his sword. He loved to hone it. He loved the sight of blood on a sword. And he loved the sight of my maidenhead on his cock too. And he would say a bloody sword is a beautiful thing. And so Barbary Dustin is right there for us, interweaving the idea of the bloody sword and the bloody impregnating penis together symbolically, which is what we were just talking about earlier. So Brandon, the hot-blooded Stark, is essentially, we're being told that Brandon of the Bloody Blade, he was probably not killing children of the forest, but rather impregnating children of the forest. Just like Brandon Stark, when Barbary talks about his bloody blade, she's actually talking about him impregnating maidens. And so the final clue about this is, remember when it says Brandon Bloody Blade killed so many children of the forest that he turned Blue Lake red? Well, we also hear about a different child of Garth who's called Rose of Red Lake. And she formed House Crane, and supposedly House Crane has skin changers occasionally in their line. So you have this idea of, at this place where Brandon was waving his bloody blade around, we have a line of first men that are demonstrating skin changer ability, which means first men interbred with children of the forest in this area to create first men skin changers, just like we believe happened with the Starks in the north. So there's a lot of, I don't know what that means for Brandon in particular, but it's George using Brandon Stark of the current story to give us a clue about the ancient Starks basically having sex with the children of the forest and creating hybrids who became skin changers. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, and I think that's an interesting thing, that's not just like the past telling us about the present. This is like the present or the near recent past telling us about the ancient past. So yeah, thank you for that. I don't have anything to add to that. That's the kind of in-depth knowledge that I get you on here for. So thank you so much.
Well, so Bite This in the chat adds a piece that I forgot, actually. She says, so think about Rose of Red Lake. Before Red Lake was Blue Lake. So she would have been Rose of Blue Lake, which makes you think about blue roses and thus Lyanna and Stark maidens. So it's an additional clue that this was Brandon of the Bloody Blade impregnating somebody here. And this is a story about the Stark ancestry. Nice job there. I told you you had good fans.
Yeah, well, I'm one thing I've learned doing this is that every time I forget something or can't quite recall a thing, there's always someone in the chat who does know it, and there's so many clever and knowledgeable people in there all the time. It's really quite mind blowing. I just want to quickly say thank you, Crone, for your super chat. It just says 5.00. I don't know quite what that means, but thank you. That's very kind. I want to, if that's okay, I want to very quickly go through these questions from my patrons so we don't run out of time before doing that. Brian Price, thank you. Did Littlefinger put the idea in the Mad King's mind to kill them being Rickard and Brandon, taunting him with evidence of their treason? Could he have done this out of revenge for the duel? My view is that no, his revenge for the duel was telling Brandon that Rhaegar had gone off with Lyanna, and I think that he knew what Brandon would do, and Brandon would try and chase down south down the King's Road. If he caught them, he would suddenly find himself in a duel not just with Rhaegar, but with Oswald Went and with Arthur Dane, which he probably would have lost. And if he did get down to King's Landing, as happened, then there is absolutely no way on this planet that King Aerys would have let him get away with demanding the head of his son without seeing it as treason. So that's my view, is that he didn't need to go any further than that. At the time, he was actually still relatively young. He wasn't known. He had no presence in court in King's Landing. So no, I don't think he had that role. But is there anything you wanted to add on that one, LML?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. And I agree that I really like the Littlefinger theory that you've come up with. It really is believable. And it just really makes all of Littlefinger's plot with Catelyn and Lysa that comes out in the end of A Storm of Swords and A Feast for Crows. It all makes just that much more sense to me. So it feels like a puzzle piece locking in. I'm pretty sold on it. I was also getting distracted by the people in the chat. Daisy, oh man, it's a Polish last name. It's a really long one too. So I'll just say Daisy. Apologies for not pronouncing your last name. She says, I must rewatch this from the start because I came on and people were comparing bloody swords to penises. ... I don't know. Yeah, do give it a chance. Do try backing up a little bit. It'll make more sense if you see how it got there. It's not as crazy as it sounds.
No, I would back that up. It's not, and I'm going to go with Kowalczykovsky. And that's what I'm going to go. So okay. I really shouldn't have attempted that because I'm sure that is entirely wrong. So apologies for that. But it's a fantastic surname. Let's just get another one from my patrons. This is Brian Price again, saying Ned Stark's death. This is quite a long question, but I think it's a really interesting one. Ned Stark's death is often used as thematic evidence of the work's differentiation from other fantasies, the end of the establishment male head of the household, as in Ned Stark's death is often used as a symbol of the end of patriarchy, to paraphrase you there. But doesn't the fact that he was never meant to be Lord of Winterfell, that he had to discover his strength unexpectedly, show that he isn't just a plot device, that his gentleness with Arya, his heroic secrecy of Jon Snow's identity showed that he is compelling in similar ways to Jon or Sansa? I would say to that, Brian, I think is a really fascinating question. I think, yes, he is used as a symbol of the end of the old order of things, the old way of doing stuff, but that's not all that he is. He is a compelling character in and of his own right. And I think that all the things you are pointing out, I would agree with completely. He's not just there as a plot device, and that's not the way that George R.R. Martin writes things, just creating characters as plot devices. But did you have any thoughts on that one, Alan?
Oh, I certainly do. So between Two Weirwoods #3, which Disputed Lands was on, by the way, with Chloe and Ileana from Girls Gone Canon, it was called Being Parented in Westeros. And our angle was, we were discussing the main characters, how they are influenced by their parents and their upbringing. And we really spent the most time with the children of Ned Stark, because Ned's influence on the story is endless, even though he dies at the end of the first book. And the primary way that his influence is felt is in the lessons that he taught his children. and in the ways that his children absorb those lessons and reconcile them with the other side of the truth. So like you said, Ned is an imperfect character. He's a little bit of a dinosaur. He feels like a little bit of a dinosaur, but he has honor and he has certain things. And so when you look at Sansa trying to learn the lessons of Ned, but also she's being taught things by Cersei and Peter, that represents kind of like trying to learn from your past while still growing and moving beyond it. And I think that's what the Stark children are essentially doing. They need to internalize Ned's basic goodness and honor, but also grow a little bit and learn a little bit more. And I think Jon and Ned are the most comparable, specifically because they both have to sacrifice their honor for the greater good. Ned allows everyone to believe that he was unfaithful when he really wasn't, in order to keep the realm safe. And Jon, again and again, has to, quote unquote, break his vows because Corn Halfhand told him, look, sometimes, you know, your honor and my honor is worth less than a hill of beans if the wildlings come over the wall. And it's a little bit Machiavellian, I guess, or what's the word for that sort of logic, that the ends justify the means? It's not actually Machiavellianism. It's what's it called?
Sort of realpolitik.
Yeah. Okay. So the point is, like, there is certain times when your own personal honor, and Jaime did the same thing, by the way. When he killed Aerys, he sacrificed his own honor in order to save people's lives straight up. And that was the right thing to do. So I think Ned and Jon are very comparable in that sense. And the way that Jaime ties into it is kind of interesting too. But to answer the question, yes, Ned is tremendously interesting, and the effect he has on his kids is an endless topic of discussion, which, yeah, there's a lot to say about that.
Thank you. I would agree. I thought that was really interesting. Daisy K, that's how I shall now refer to her, has confirmed in the chat that I did indeed pronounce her name incorrectly. But Kyle apparently did a better job. So well done, Kyle. So apologies for not getting that one right. But we had a super chat from Carrie Nevis, who, thank you very much. Who does one on behalf of Catherine Scully. I love it when people do this, picking up questions from other people that they think it's worth us keeping an eye on, because it's impossible with the speed with which the chat goes through to notice everything. So thank you. That's incredibly generous, doing a super chat on behalf of someone else. The question is whether Robb could have been Brandon's son. I think the answer here is no. And I think the answer is no because of the timelines and what happened. Robb was conceived. So we are told in the 2 weeks after Catelyn's marriage to Ned. Now, Catelyn's marriage to Ned happened a long time. I don't have the exact timelines in front of me, but I'm going to guess about 9 months or so after probably actually a year or so after Brandon last left Riverrun. So in that time, you've got Brandon leaving Riverrun off on some mysterious errand. I think it was to go after Littlefinger, but it doesn't have to have been. He went off at some point while he was out there. He then headed on down to King's Landing. That took another couple of weeks. Then you've got about another 4 weeks when the Rickard and co will head down to King's Landing. Then after that, you get the demand going over to Jon Arryn to get Ned and Robert Baratheon there. That gets refused, at which point Ned then hacks across the Mountains of the Moon, which was just as winter was receding, a really hazardous and long journey, gets a fishing boat across the Bight, then goes up from White Harbour all the way up to Winterfell, then gathers his army, and then comes all the way down from Winterfell to Riverrun, at which point he then needs to be negotiating with Hoster Tully to try and get the marriage, and the marriage only happens after that. So that's a huge amount of time that has happened. If Brandon and Catelyn if Catelyn had become pregnant by Brandon, then by that point in time, she would have already had the baby. So there is no way, in my view, that Robb could be Brandon's child. So there's a lot of confusion about the timelines in terms of Robert's Rebellion that I'm hoping over the course of my next 2 or 3 videos to be able to try and clear up a little bit of this. But there was a long period of time that went on between Brandon leaving Riverrun and Ned arriving back down there. Is there anything you wanted to add on that one, LML?
No, I agree. I don't think it's possible, and I wouldn't have had the patience to explain it that thoroughly. So no, that's all needs to be said.
And a thing for a super chat, you know me. Okay, let's. I've got one final question from a patron, and then we'll try and dip in with a final couple of questions in the chat before closing up in about 10 minutes time, if that's okay, guys. So the final question from one of my patrons was, this is Mary Hadley, who was asking, how do you feel, or how do you think Lyanna felt about Rhaegar when she found out Rickard and Brandon were killed by his father? She must have felt conflicted and more than a little responsible. Well, I'll throw this one to you because I charged off on my own on the last one. What do you, once she found out what had happened, what do you think that Lyanna might have felt about Rhaegar?
I mean, it's obviously really tragic, and I do think that's a moment that happened where she hears all this and they feel awful about it. I don't know that Lyanna would direct anger at Rhaegar. I think that Lyanna being in love with Rhaegar would separate him from his crazy father. But at the same time, I guess once you hear that he went out and fought on that side, yeah, I don't know, man. It's pretty messed up. That's layers of messed up. And I just wonder if we're going to get a window into that moment. Like, is Bran going to see that moment at the bedside where Ned and Lyanna are talking? It could be really gut-wrenching.
I agree. I think that the second part of that is the bit that I find the most intriguing. The first part, I agree completely, that when Lyanna discovered, as she will have done at some point, what happened, I think she will have been able to relatively easily, I'm sure she'd have been heartbroken and, yes, feeling a little bit guilty, but I think that she will have been able to divorce what Aerys was doing with what Rhaegar was doing. So I don't think there's an issue there. I think that the conversation I would love to eavesdrop on is the one when Gerald Hightower comes and says, oh, hey, Rhaegar, your dad now wants you to come and fight against Lyanna's dad. Is that all right? That's the one that I think I would find it fascinating what she thought about at that time. So
yeah, there's a couple of conversations you'd like to be a fly on the wall for, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, surely she will have thought to herself, you know, so one of my brothers has already died and my father has already died. Now you're going to go off there and face in battle one of my other brothers. It's not good. So yeah, that's the bit that is slightly intriguing for me. We had a super chat. Thank you very much, Tycat, $5, very kind. No question, just glad to make it this time. Well, I'm glad you made it. That's fantastic. So, LML, if it's okay with you, why don't you have a quick? I'll have a quick answer of a question myself. Do you want to have a quick flick through the chat, pick out a question for us to end on, and I'll just have a quick look, see if there is anything here. Pegleg Pete, hi Pete, saying not a fly on the wall, a three-eyed raven with a weirwood. Yes, that would be even better. In fact, that's possibly the only way that we will find out what happened in that conversation. Just flicking through.
There were some questions earlier, but it was a ways back there. I think we might have to ask people to throw up some new ones here. Or re-ask your earlier ones.
Okay, well, if there's nothing that's immediately coming there, guys, you've got 5 minutes to drop in a killer question there in the chat. And while we're doing that,
here's one from your Grit Weirwood. saw this earlier too. Did the Starks bury their kings with their dire wolves in order to sanctify both first and second lives? Well, it would have to do with when they died. I guess if they both died in battle, you might bury them together. But when Lady dies, she's buried in the Lichyard at Winterfell. So it would probably have to do with the circumstance. The main thing is that the fact that we see the very oldest Stark kings with direwolves at their side, to me, says that the Starks have been wargs from the very beginning, like going back to the time of the Long Night. They've always been wargs. The last hero's dog was probably his wolf, and he was probably a Stark warg. You know, that's the way I tend to see all that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, though, we shouldn't necessarily, in every instance, see the presence of a direwolf in a statue next to somebody as necessarily mean that they had a pet direwolf, so to speak. I think that it's entirely
True.
particularly
Yeah.
the more recent ones. It's a symbolic thing because it is the symbol of House Stark. Similarly, the sword. Some of them, yes, they all carried swords, but perhaps not that sword. The more recent ones would be more closely. So Ned Stark would have been more closely associated with ice. He wasn't carrying it around everywhere. It was a ceremonial sword, but still, that would be a sword that he would be more closely associated with than the ancient style of sword which was laid across their lap.
Well, Robert, George is a big fan of the idea of evolving culture. You know, so when he shows us the traditions of modern man, he's always sort of implying that there is an older thing. Like, look at Thoros's last kiss. That's a perfect example. The Red Priests do this to everybody when they die. They do this last kiss thing. But for some reason, when Thoros did it to Beric, his mouth, his lungs filled with fire, and he actually breathed fire into Beric and resurrected Beric. So what I would suspect is that the ancient R'hllorys, or the first fire mages, they knew the secret of fire resurrection, and that is where that tradition of the last kiss comes from. But hundreds of years goes by, magic ebbs and flows, the original meaning is lost. This is what happens in the real world to myths too. The meaning changes, and after a while, people don't know as much why they do things. Take for the Christmas tree, for example. Like, a lot of us know it has to do with druids and some European folklore and St. Nicholas or something, but for the most part, Americans and Westerners have Christmas trees, and it's now a new tradition in America that's evolved from older traditions. George loves doing that in the books, and so the Stark wolves are the same thing. I think the original Starks were definitely wargs. Over time, probably fewer and fewer of them were. Until we have this renaissance in the modern story. But those statues are a clue about the original truth.
I agree completely. And guys, I've found a question to end us on, which is from 26 Art Girl, one of my patrons, and this is bringing us right back to our favorite topic, which is slightly off topic for this one, but there is a link, which is, if Rickon goes feral, could he kill Davos? Now, I think that I was about to throw it over to LML. He appears to have disappeared for a second. I suspect it's going for a costume change.
No, I'm here. That's cool.
No, that's cool. What do you think? Do you think that there's a chance that Rickon could kill Davos?
That's really dark, man. I mean, I know George is dark and everything, but I hope that doesn't happen. I don't like to think about unhappy things like that. I love Davos.
I think I'm with you 100% there. I really, really, really hope not. It's possible. I don't think it will be the case. I think that Davos will survive in the books, but I think that he will be the vehicle through which Rickon comes back onto the mainland. But yes, I think that it's entirely likely that he's not going to get immediately a very warm welcome from Rickon as and when he finds him. Okay, guys.
That I agree with.
Yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thank you. Apologies for all the questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, but we've been going for a while now, and I want to thank LML. LML, do you want to just remind people where they can find you on the internet?
Yep, I've got 2 podcasts: Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire and I just made a podcast feed for Between Two Weirwoods. Similarly, I've got 2 YouTube channels. I got Lucifer Means Lightbringer, which is all the mythical astronomy stuff, and I've got the Between Two Weirwoods YouTube channel. And the mythical astronomy of Ice and Fire is lots of symbolism and mythology, and the Between Two Weirwoods is the discussion panels one that I was talking about. So this Sunday, 3 Eastern, we'll be doing a Between Two Weirwoods on religion. My guests will be Brendan Beefish, Gretchen Ellis, and Sanrixian, all of whom have pretty interesting religious backgrounds. And so we're gonna dive into the religions of the book and some of George's influence from the real world religions. And that's going to be lots of fun. Looking forward to that. And like I was saying, I'm going to have more Between Two Weirwoods panels coming. Robert will be on a couple of them. Still working out the timing, but I'll have Mechanics of Magic probably coming sooner than later. And Robert will be on that one. I'm going to have Emmett Booth. Poor Quentin is signed up. Maester Mary is on there. So we're going to be having a good old time. And then as well, we'll be doing it's an actual RLJ Tower of Joy episode sometime soon too. So subscribe to the channel and you'll see your favorite Deep Geek man on there debating it up on the couch in between the Weirwoods. So thanks a lot for having me on, Robert. Had a great time. This was a good topic. We kept it pretty horny goat free for you, so I hope you appreciate the restraint. But let me see those horny goat emojis, guys. Come on, one last time.
Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to coming onto Between Two Weirwoods. There's 2 fantastic topics and two great lineups to be discussing things with. Guys, I would highly recommend you go and check out LML's channel and Between Two Weirwoods, or the podcasts if you're into podcasts. He really does have some original and some excellent content. As for me, I've already said it. Please do check out my second channel, The Well Told Tale, if you're interested in hearing me narrate what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. Next up, just started, is Frankenstein. Guys, thank you again to my patrons. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do check out the Patreon page. There's a link down there in the description. Thank you again for the super chats and the amazing questions that we had. Sorry if we didn't get to yours this time. Hopefully we will next time. But guys, I'll see you same time next week here for some more chat. I've got a great guest lined up that I'm sure you'll really like. Okay, guys, take care, and I shall see you again.
See you later, guys.